My life's dearest desire? She fell into deep thought, the pen between her lips. Then drawing a deep breath, she gave a smile, hard to say.
Why is it hard? Javiria asked her.
Because I desire so many things, and each one of them is so important for me, she replied, shaking her head.
They were both sitting at the farther end of the auditorium, their backs to the wall. It was their 8th day at the FSC classes, and they spent their free period there, nibbling salted peanuts one by one.
Javiria repeated her question. What's your life's dearest wish, Amama?
Amama looked at her with some surprise, and pondered over the question, then parrying the question with a demand. She said, You tell me first what you desire most.
I asked you first, so you should reply first, retorted Javiria.
Very well, let me think. Amama conceded defeat. My life's dearest desire, she mumbled to herself. Well, one wishes to live long, very long, she said.
Why? Laughed Javiria.
50 or 60 years are too short for me. One should live to be at least 100. And then there is so much I wish to do. Should I die early? All my wishes would remain unfulfilled. She popped a peanut into her mouth.
What else? Said Javiria.
I want to be the most outstanding doctor in the country, the best eye specialist, so that when the history of eye surgery in Pakistan is compiled, my name will be at the very top of the list. She looked up with a smile.
And what if you cannot become a doctor? After all, that depends both on merit and luck, Javiria stated.
That is out of the question. I am working so hard to make it to the merit list. Besides, my parents can afford to send me abroad if I don't get into a medical college here.
But still, what if you cannot be a doctor?
That's impossible. It's my life's dearest desire. I can sacrifice everything for it. This has been my lifelong dream. And how can one just ignore or forget one's dreams? Impossible. Amama shook her head decisively as she picked another peanut off her palm and nibbled on it.
Nothing is impossible in life. Anything can happen at any time. Suppose your wish does not come true. How would you react? Said Javiria.
Mama fell into thought again. To begin with, I'll weep a lot, a great deal, for many dabs, and then I'll die.
Javiria burst out laughing. You just said you wanted a very long life, and now you want to die.
Obviously, what's the point of living then? All my plans are built around my career in medicine, and if that is not to be a part of my life, then what remains?
So you mean this one dream of your life will wipe out all other dreams?
Yes, think of it that way.
Your most important desire is to be a doctor, not to live long.
You could say so.
Very well so. If you can't become a doctor, then how would you choose to die? Would you choose suicide or a natural death?
Natural death, of course. I can't kill myself, Amama replied casually.
And if you do not die naturally, then what? I mean, if you do not die soon, despite not being a doctor, you would go on living.
No, I know that I'll die very soon. If I can't be a doctor, I will be so heartbroken that I will not survive, she replied decisively.
It is difficult to believe that a cheerful person like you can be so despairing as to cry yourself to death, and that to jest because you weren't able to pursue a medical career. Sounds funny, mocked Javiria.
Stop talking about me. Tell me about yourself. What is your heart's greatest desire? Amama changed the subject.
Let it go.
I let it go. Come on, tell me.
You will be offended if I say it. Javiria spoke hesitatingly.
Amama turned around in surprised to look at her. Why would I be offended?
Javiria was quiet.
What is it that I will mind? Amama repeated her question.
You will, Javiria murmured.
Why should your life's greatest wish so affect my life that I would get upset? Amama was quite irritated. Is it your wish that I not become a doctor? Amama seemed to suddenly remember.
Oh no, laughed Javiria. There is more to life than being a doctor, she stated philosophically.
Stop talking in riddles and answer me, Amama said firmly. I promise I will not mind anything you say. She held out her hand in a gesture of peace.
Regardless of your promise, you are going to be very angry when you hear what I have to say. Let's talk of something else. Javiria replied.
All right, let me guess. Your decision is linked to something of great value to me, right? Queried Imama, after a thoughtful pause.
Javiria nodded her head.
The question is, what is so important to me that I should? She stopped in mid-sentence, but unless I know the nature of your wish, I cannot come to a conclusion. Javiria, tell me please. The suspense is too much for me, she pleaded.
Javiria was lost in thought. Imama studied her face. Javiria looked up at her after a while.
Other than my career, there is only one thing I value most in my life, Imama addressed her, and if you want to say something in that context, then say so, I won't mind. Imama was serious.
Javiria was taken aback. Imama was looking at the ring on her hand. A smile crossed Javiria's face.
My life's dearest wish is that you.
Javiria revealed her thoughts. Imama's face went white with shock. Javiria could not guess the impact her words had on Imama, but the expression on her face showed that the reaction was much more intense than she had expected.
I did tell you that you would be offended. Javiria tried to redeem the situation, but Imama stared back without a word.
Scene change.
Moise was howling with pain, doubled up and holding on to his stomach. The 12-year-old boy, facing him, wiped the blood off his nose on the sleeve of his torn shirt and swung the tennis racket in his hand to hit Moise on the leg. Moise let out another scream and straightened up. With disbelief, he looked at his brother, younger by 2 years, who was hitting him with the same racket that Moise had brought there. This was the 3rd time they had fought this week, and every time it was his younger brother who started the fight. He and Moise had never had a good relationship and had fought since childhood, but their quarrels had been mostly verbal and included threats. But of late they had become physical. This is what happened today. They had come back from school together. When they got down from the car, the younger brother roughly dragged his bag out of the boot as Moise was picking up his school bag. In the process, he bruised Moise's hand, making him wince with pain.
Have you gone blind?
Moise cried out as his brother walked off nonchalantly. He heard Moise turned around, looked at him, then opened the front door and walked into the lounge. Incensed, Moise followed on his heels.
The next time you do anything like that, I'll break your hand. Moise shouted.
The younger boy took his bag off his shoulder, put it down, and with hands on his hips, defiantly faced Moise.
I will. So what will you do? Break my hand? Do you have the guts?
You'll find out if you repeat what you did today.
Moise headed towards his room, but his brother stopped him, grabbing his bag with all his strength.
Don't tell me now.
He flung Moise's bag down, flushed with anger. Moise picked up his brother's bag and hurled it away, without a pause. His brother landed a sharp blow on Moise's leg. Moise lunged at him, punching his face, and his nose began to bleed. Sound from the younger boy. He grabbed Moise. Despite that, there was no sound from the younger boy. He grabbed Moise's tie and tried to choke him. Moise retaliated by grabbing his collar. There was a tearing sound as the shirt ripped. With all his force, Moise hit his brother on his midriff so as to make him lose his grip on him.
Now I'll show you. I'll break your hand.
Shouting and abusing, Moise picked up the tennis racket that was lying in corner of the lounge. The next thing he knew was that the racket was in his brother's hand and was swung with such force that Moise could not save himself. Blows rained down on him, on his back and legs. Their elder brother came into the lounge in a fit of rage.
What is your problem? You create an upheaval. As soon as you get home.
At the sound of his voice, the younger brother first lowered and then raised the racket again.
And aren't you ashamed of yourself for raising your hand at your older brother?
The eldest brother looked at the hand holding the racket.
No.
He retorted without any remorse. He threw the racket down, picked up his bag and walked away.
You will have to pay for this, Moise called out after him, rubbing his sore leg.
Sure. Why not?
He gave Moise a weird smile.
Get a bat the next time. It was no fun hitting you with a tennis racket. No bones are broken.
Check out your nose. It's broken for sure.
Furious, Moise looked towards the staircase where his brother had been standing just a while ago.
Scene change.
For the fourth time, Mrs. Samantha Richards stared at the boy sitting on the first chair in the second row by the window. With complete disregard for the class, he was busy staring out of the window. From time to time he would look at Mrs. Richards and then turn back to the view from the window. This was her first day as biology teacher at one of the international schools in Islamabad. She was a diplomat's wife and a teacher by profession. They had recently arrived in Islamabad. At all her husband's postings, she had taken up teaching assignments in the schools attached to the embassy, continuing the syllabus and teaching schedule of her predecessor, Miss Mariam. After a brief introduction to the class, Mrs. Richards began explaining the function of the heart and the circulation system and drew a diagram on the board. She looked at the student, who was looking distractedly out of the window, and, using a time-worn technique, she fixed her gaze on him and stopped speaking. A hush fell over the class. The boy turned back to the class, meeting his gaze. Mrs. Richards smiled and resumed her lecture. For a while she continued to keep her gaze on the boy, who was now busy writing in his notebook. Then she turned her attention to the class. She believed the boy was embarrassed enough not to let his attention wander, but just a couple of minutes later she found him looking out of the window again. Once more, she stopped her lecture, and he turned to look at her. This time she did not smile. She continued addressing the class. As she turned to the writing board, the student again turned to the window. A look of annoyance crossed her face, and as she fell silent again, the boy looked at her with a frown and looked away beyond the window. His attitude was so insulting that Mrs. Samantha Richards' face flushed.
Salar, what are you looking at?
She asked sternly.
Nothing.
Came the one-word reply. He gave her a piercing look.
Do you know what I am teaching?
Hope so.
His tone was so rude that Samantha Richards capped the marker she had in her hand and slapped it down on the table.
If that is so, then come up here and draw and label this diagram.
She erased the figure on the board. The boy's face changed a myriad colors. She saw the students in the class exchange glances. The boy stared coldly at Samantha Richards as she cleaned the last trace of her diagram from the board. He left his seat. Moving swiftly, he picked up the marker from the table and, with lightning speed, in exactly 2 minutes and 57 seconds, he had drawn and labeled the diagram, replacing the cap on the marker. He slapped it down on the table, just as Mrs. Richards had done, and without looking at her, returned to his seat. Mrs. Richards did not see him tossing down the marker or walking back to his seat. She was looking in disbelief at the diagram, which had taken her 10 minutes to make and which he had completed in less than 3 minutes. It was far better than her work. She could not find even a minor flaw in it. Somewhat embarrassed, she turned to look at the boy. Once again he was looking out of the window.
Scene change.
Wasim knocked on the door for the third time. This time he could hear Imama inside.
Who is it?
Imama, it's me. Open the door,
said Wasim, standing back. There was silence on the other side. A little later, the lock clicked, and Wasim turned the doorknob to enter. Imama moved towards her bed, with her back to Wasim.
What brings you here at this time?
Why did you turn in so early? It's only 10 now,
replied Wasim as he walked in.
I was sleepy.
She sat down on the bed. Wasim was alarmed to see her.
Have you been crying?
It was a spontaneous remark. Imama's eyes were red and swollen, and she was trying to look away.
No, I wasn't crying. Just a bad headache. She tried to smile.
Wasim, sitting down beside her, held her hand, trying to check her temperature.
Any fever?
He asked with some concern. Then he let go of her hand.
You don't have fever. Perhaps you should take a tablet for your headache.
I have.
Good. Go to sleep then. I had come to talk to you, but you're in no state.
Wasim turned to leave the room. Imama made no effort to stop him. She followed him to the door and shut it behind him, flinging Herself on the bed, she buried her face in the pillow. She was sobbing again.
Scene change.
The 13-year-old boy was engrossed in a music show on TV when Tayaba peeped in. She looked at her son, somewhat uncertainly, and entered the room irritated.
What's going on?
I'm watching TV.
He replied, without looking at her.
Watching TV? For God's sake, are you aware that your exams have started? Tayaba asked, standing in front of him.
So what?
He said, annoyed.
So what? You should be in your room with your books, not sitting here watching this vulgar show. Tayaba scolded him.
I have studied as much as I need to. Now please move out of my way.
His tone reflected his irritation.
All the same excuses. Go in and study. Tayaba stood her ground. No, I will not get up, nor will I go in and study. My studies and my papers are my concern, not yours. If you were concerned about your studies, would you be sitting here?
He ignored Tayaba's comment and rudely shooed her away.
I'm going to talk to your father today. Tayaba tried a threat.
You can talk to him, for all I care. What will happen? What is he going to do? I've told you that I've already prepared for my exams. So then what's your problem?
This is your final examination. You should be concerned about it. Tayaba softened her tone.
I am not a 4-year-old who you need to nag. I have a better understanding of my responsibilities than you, so don't pester me with your silly advice.
Your exams are going on. Pay attention to our studies. You should be in your room. I will have a word with your father.
What rubbish.
Standing up, he flung the remote control at the wall and, stomping his feet, left the room. Tayaba, helpless and humiliated, watched him go. It was New Year's Eve, 30 minutes to go. Before the new year began, a group of 10 or so teenagers were roaring around the city streets on their motorbikes, doing all kinds of stunts. Some of them wore shiny headbands to celebrate the coming year. An hour ago they were in one of the uptown supermarkets, teasing girls with whistles. They had firecrackers too, which they let off to celebrate. At 11:45 they reached the parking lot of the Gymkhana Club where a New Year's party was in full swing. The boys also had invitations to the party and their parents were already there when they got in. It was 5 to midnight. In a few moments, the lights in the hall and the dance floor would be switched off, and then with a display of fireworks on the lawns, the new year would be heralded in. The partying would be on, all night dancing, drinking, all the festivities especially organized for the occasion by the Gymkhana management. Lights off meant a display of complete abandon. That was what the crowds came for. One of the teenagers who had joined the party was on the dance floor, rocking to the beat and impressing all with his performance. At 10 seconds to 12 the lights went off. Voices and laughter filled the hall as people counted the seconds to the new year, and this rose to a pitch as the clock struck midnight and the hall lit up again. The teenagers were now out in the parking lot, their car horns blaring away, beer can in hand. The youth, who was on the dance floor, got on the roof of a car. He pulled out another beer can from his jacket and pitched it at the windscreen of a parked car, which shattered with an explosion as the full can hit it. He stood on the car, calmly drinking from the can of beer in his hand.
Scene change.
For the last half hour Salar had been watching Kamran, trying to master the video game. The score remained the same, probably because Kamran was trying to maneuver a difficult track. Salar was also in the lounge, busy writing notes. Half an hour later, Salar put his notebook away, stifled a yawn, stretched his legs out on the table and, crossing his hands behind his head, looked at the TV screen as Kamran started a new game, having lost the previous round.
What's the problem, Kamran?
Nothing. I got this new game, but it is really tough to score,
Kamran said, in a tired tone.
Let me see.
Salar got up from the sofa and took the remote control. Kamran watched silently. In the opening seconds, Salar was racing at a speed that Kamran had never reached. The track that had challenged Kamran was like child's play for Salar. It was hard for Kamran to keep his eyes on the car that was racing at a fantastic speed in the first minute, and yet Salar had complete control over it. 3 minutes later, Cameron saw the car swerve, go off the track and explode into smithereens. Cameron turned to Sailor with a smile. He realized why the car had been destroyed. Laying the remote control down on the table, Salar picked up his notebook.
It's a very boring game.
He remarked as he jumped over Cameron's legs and went out. Cameron clenched his teeth as he saw the 7-digit score on the screen. He looked at the door as Salar left.
Scene change.
They were both quiet once again. Asjad was beginning to worry. Imama had not always been as withdrawn as she was now. One could have counted the words she had spoken in the last half hour. He had known her since childhood. She was a lively girl. Asjad had felt happy in her company. She was so quick, witted and vivacious. But in the last few years, she had changed, the transformation having become more pronounced. Since she started medical school, Asjad felt that she had something on her mind. At times, she would appear to be worried, and sometimes she was distinctly cold and distant, as though she wanted to end their meeting and leave as soon as possible. This time too, he had the same feeling.
I often think that it is me who insists on our meeting. Perhaps it makes little difference to you whether we meet or not,
He said despondently. She was sitting on a garden chair across from him, looking at the creepers on the boundary wall. At Asjad's remark, she fixed her gaze on him. He cast an inquiring glance, but she was silent, so he rephrased his words.
My coming here makes no difference to you. Imama, am I right?
What can I say?
At least you can say no. You're mistaken. That.
No, you're mistaken.
Imama cut him short. Her tone was as cold and her expression as indifferent as before. Asjad sighed in despair.
Yes. I wish and pray that it may be so. That I may indeed be mistaken. However, talking to you, I feel you do not care.
What makes you think so?
Asjad detected a note of annoyance in her tone.
Many things. For one, you never respond properly to anything I say.
I do make every effort to reply properly to whatever you say. What can I do if you do not like what I have to say? Asjad felt that she was more annoyed.
I did not mean that. I did not like what you say. It's that you only say yes or no in response. Sometimes I feel as if I'm talking to myself.
When you ask me if I am well, I say yes or no. What else can I say? If you want to hear a spiel in response to a simple question, and tell me what you would like to hear and I'll say it. She was serious.
You could add something to that yes or no, if nothing else. Ask me how I am.
Ask you how you are? You are sitting here across me, talking to me. Obviously you are quite well. Otherwise, you'd be at home, in bed, sick.
Imama, these are formalities.
And you know very well that. I do not believe in formalities. There's no need for you to ask me how I am. I will not mind it at all.
Asjad was speechless.
Fine. Formalities aside, one can talk of other things. Discuss something. Talk to each other about what interests us, what keeps us busy.
Asjad, what can I discuss with you? You are a businessman. I am a medical student. What should I ask you? About the stock market position? Was the trend bullish or bearish? By how many points did the index rise? Or where you are sending the next consignment? How much rebate did the government give you this time? She went on coldly. Or shall I discuss anatomy with you? What affects the function of the liver? What new techniques have been used for bypass surgery this year? What should be the voltage of electric shocks given to restore a failing heart? These are our spheres of work. So what points of discussion can we have about these? That will help us to achieve love and familiarity? I fail to understand. The color of Asjad's face deepened. He was cursing the moment that he had complained to Imama.
There are other interests too in a person's life,
he said weakly.
No, besides my studies, there's no other interest in my life, Imama said decisively, shaking her head for emphasis.
After all, we shared interests earlier on.
Forget about what happened earlier, Imama interjected. I cannot afford to waste time now. What surprises me is that, despite being a businessman, you are so immature and emotional. You should be more practical. Asjad was silent. We know our relationship. if you think my practical approach to our relationship shows a lack of interest or indifference, then I cannot do much about it. That I am here with you means that I value this relationship. Otherwise, I would not be sitting here having tea with a stranger. She paused a moment, then continued. And whether you coming here or not makes any difference to me. The answer is that we are both very busy people. We are the products of a modern age. I am no here who waits upon you with delicacies while you play the flute. The truth is that it really makes no difference whether or not we meet or talk. Our relationship, as it is today, will continue. Or do you feel it will change?
If Asjed's brow did not sweat, it was simply because it was the month of December. There was a difference of 8 years in their ages, but for the first time Asjad felt it was not 8 but 18, and she was the older one. Just 2 weeks ago, she had turned 19, but to him it seemed as if she had raced overnight, from teenage to middle age, and he had regressed to his pre-teens. She sat across him, legs crossed and eyes fixed on his face, impassively waiting for his response. Asjad looked at the engagement ring on her finger and cleared his throat.
You're right. I just thought we should chat more because it would help develop some understanding between us.
Asjad, I know and understand you very well. I am disappointed to learn that you think we still need to develop an understanding between us. I thought there already was a good deal of understanding. Asjad had to accept that it wasn't his day, and if you think that talking about business and anatomy will improve the situation, then very well, we'll do that in the future. There was an element of disinterest in Imama's tone.
You're not happy with what I said.
Why should I be unhappy? This embarrassed him further.
Perhaps I said the wrong thing. Not perhaps, but certainly. I said the wrong thing. He repeated the last phrase with emphasis. You know how important this relationship is for me. I have many dreams for the future.
He took a deep breath. She continued to stare, expressionless, at the creeper along the wall.
Perhaps that is why I am so sensitive about it. I have no fears about us. This engagement took place with our consent.
His gaze was fixed on her, and he spoke with emotion, but suddenly, he felt once more that she was not there, that he was talking to himself. The music from the annex, behind the huge bungalow, could be heard on the lawn, in front of the house. Anyone would have been amazed at the level of endurance of those inside, but one look inside, and one would know the reason behind this level of endurance. The room was full of swirling smoke and a strange smell. Empty cartons of food from a popular restaurant, disposable plates and spoons, bottles of soft drinks, and scraps of leftovers were strewn all over the carpet, which was stained by ketchup. The 7 boys in the room were sprawled on the carpet. Empty beer cans were scattered around. This was not all. They had been entertaining themselves with drugs too. This was the 3rd time in the last 2 months that the boys had gathered here for an adventure of this kind. So far they had experimented with 4 different drugs. The first time it was a drug that one of them had found in his father's closet. The next time it was a drug which a schoolmate had bought from a club in Islamabad. Then it was something acquired from an Afghan in a Rawalpindi market. Every time they had combined drugs with alcohol, procuring which was no problem. Each time this happened, 6 of the 7 boys ended up completely stoned. Even now it was only the 7th boy who was in his senses. His face was covered with acne, and he was dressed in a dark blue shirt with its collar turned up Elvis Presley style, and hideous gray jeans, which had Madonna's face adorning each knee. He opened his eyes to glance at the others around him. His eyes were red, but not because he was in a stupor like them. A little later he straightened up, and shaking the remaining drug from the little container out into a cone, he pulled out a straw and began sniffing it. Then he threw away the straw, and taking some of the drug on a fingertip, tasted it very cautiously. Almost instantly, he spat it out. The stuff was of excellent quality, but his expression showed that he had not enjoyed the experience. He swallowed some beer as if to clear the taste of the drug from his mouth. The other boys lay around on the carpet, totally intoxicated and unaware of themselves. He looked at them thoughtfully as he drank from the beer can. His eyes, though swollen, were bright enough. The drug had not knocked him out fully. This had happened the last 3 times too. Though his friends had been knocked senseless after taking drugs, the effect on him was not so pronounced. The first 2 times he had left them in their stupor and had driven home late in the night. This time too, he wanted to get away. The odor of the drugs in the room repulsed him. He stumbled as he tried to stand up. He straightened up, and picking his key and wallet off the floor, he turned off the stereo. He looked around the room, as if trying to remember something. Then he turned towards the door, and sitting down again, put on his joggers, tying their laces around his ankles. Finally, unlocking the door, he went out into the dark corridor. Groping his way, he went past the main door out onto the lawn. As he was coming down the stairs, he felt his nose was running, and when he touched his upper lip, he felt a sticky liquid on his hands. He switched on the light in the entrance and saw blood on his fingertips. Reaching into his pocket for his handkerchief, he wiped the blood off his fingers and nose. There was a strange, sharp sensation in his throat which he tried to clear, but he felt he was suffocating. He took a few deep breaths to ease the constriction and spat 2 or 3 times. Suddenly he felt a tingling in his nose. He doubled over as blood began gushing out of his nose, pouring down the marble stairs like a stream.
Scene change.
Prize distribution ceremony was underway at the golf club. Sailor Sikandar was to receive the first prize in the under-16 competition for his 7 under par score. Applauding when Sailor's name was called out, Sikandar Usman thought he would have to do something about the cabinet where the trophies were displayed. The trophies and shields Sailor would bring home this year would be as many as he had in the past year. All of Sikandar's children excelled in their studies, but Sailor was different from the rest. In winning awards, he was far ahead of them. It was not just difficult to beat this boy who had an IQ score of 150. It was impossible. Clapping proudly, Sikandar turned to his wife and whispered,
"This is Salar's 13th trophy and the 4th one this year."
You keep a record of everything, don't you?
She replied, smiling at her husband, whose gaze was fixed on Salar, as he received the trophy from the chief guest.
"Only for golf, and you know the reason very well. I bet that even if Salar had been playing this tournament with professional players, he would have still won the trophy,"
he claimed proudly. Sailor was shaking hands with the other winners seated around him. Sikandar's wife was not surprised by his claim about Salar. She knew that it was not an expression of paternal sentiment. It was the truth. Sailor was indeed extraordinary. She recalled when he had played 18 holes at this golf course with her brother Zubair for the first time. The way he had brought a ball that had accidentally fallen into the rough out onto the green was a display of expertise. Zubair was amazed.
"I can't believe it."
He had repeated this statement endlessly till the end of the game. If the shot from the rough had amazed Zubair, then Salar's putters had floored him. As the ball rolled towards the hole, he leaned against his club and turned around to gauge the distance between Salar and his target. Shaking his head in disbelief, he looked at Salar.
"Salar Sahib is not playing well today,"
muttered the caddy, standing by the golf cart behind Zubair, who turned around in surprise.
"So he's not playing well." He looked at the caddy. "Was this a joke?"
"Yes, sir, otherwise the ball would not have gone into the rough." The caddy said, "You have played here today for the first time, but Salar Sahib has been playing here for the last 3 years. That's why I say he's not playing well."
"Next time, I will be fully prepared when I come here. And I will also select the site for the game."
Zubair was somewhat miffed as they walked across towards Salar.
"Any time, any place," she confidently challenged her brother on her son's behalf.
"I want to invite you to Karachi this weekend, with all expenses paid."
Zubair said casually as he approached Salar.
"Why?" "To play on my behalf against the president of the Karachi Chamber of Commerce. I lost the election to him, but if he loses a golf match, and that too to a child, he'll have a heart attack, so let's settle the score."
Salar's mother laughed at her brother's words, but a frown creased Salar's brow.
"Child?"
he repeated with emphasis, the only objectionable word in Zubair's comment.
"Uncle, I think I'll have to play another 18 holes against you tomorrow."
Scene change.
Asjad opened the door and entered his mother's room.
Ami, I need to discuss something important with you.
Yes. What is it?
Asjad sat down on the sofa.
Have you been to Hashim uncle's lately?
No. Is there anything special?
Imama is over for this weekend.
Very well, we'll go this evening. Have you been there?
Shakila smiled at him.
Yes.
How is she? She's come home after a long time, Shakila remarked.
Yes, after 2 months.
Shakila sensed Asjad was upset. Is there a problem?
Ami, I find Imama a little changed, Asjad said with a sigh.
Changed? What do you mean?
I cannot explain what I mean. It's just that her attitude towards me is rather strange. Asjad shrugged his shoulders. Today she took offense to something quite minor. She's not the way she was before. I am not able to figure out the reason for this change.
It's your imagination, Asjad. Why would her attitude change? You're thinking too emotionally.
No, Ami, initially, I thought I was being oversensitive. But after today, I don't think I am imagining things. She treats me in a very offhand manner.
What do you think is the reason for this change in her attitude? She asked as she put the brush back on the table.
I have no idea.
Did you ask her?
Not just once, but several times.
And?
Like you, she always says that I am mistaken. He shrugged again. Sometimes she says it's because of her studies. Sometimes she says it is because she has matured now.
It's not so far-fetched. Perhaps that is the reason, Shakila replied pensively.
Ami, it's not a question of her becoming serious, I think. She's moving away from me, said Asjad.
You're being silly, Asjad. I don't believe there's any such issue. You have both known each other since childhood. You know your temperaments. Shakila felt her son's fears were meaningless. Obviously, changes do take place. As the years pass, you're no longer children. Stop worrying over trivialities. She tried to reason with her son. In any case, Hashim Bai wants the two of you to get married next year. Imama can continue and complete her education afterwards. He wants to fulfill his responsibility, Shakila revealed.
When did he say this? Asjad was taken by surprise.
Many times. In fact, I think they may have started the preparations. Asjad breathed a sigh of relief. Maybe that is why Imama is agitated.
Yes, possibly. The wedding should take place next year. Asjad replied with some satisfaction.